This is a BC Eagle Investments video. Multiple asset class investing using Excel to handle big data. This is the spreadsheet that the class has created using the ETF values for the S&P 500, the real estate investment trusts, the Europe, Asia, and Far East ETFs, and the Goldman Sachs Commodity Trust ETF known as GSG. These four portfolios combined will produce a guru-weighted portfolio that we will use to test to see whether this asset allocation improves the risk-return profile of the investment. This video has four main purposes. Number one, to calculate the future value of each of the individual ETF returns so that we may calculate the compound average growth rate for each ETF. The second thing is to use a formula to calculate the weighted average return for the guru-rated portfolio. Number three is to show which of the ETFs produce the highest return in each period, and then let Excel indicate which ETF that was each period. And number four, to use functions to calculate the various metrics that are used to evaluate the portfolio. This portfolio uses a very limited set of data from April 30th, 2009 through November 30th, 2009 to demonstrate the use of functions and formulas, little data, so to speak, so that when the big data is used, you will be able to incorporate all the lessons that we have here. To use this spreadsheet, look for the gray colored areas. The gray colored areas have functions or formulas in them that you can use to calculate the various values. In the areas where there is no gray area, you see just the value. What you can do to practice is to try to replicate the values or the formulas that you see in the gray area to produce the values that you see in the non-gray area. Let's get started with step number one. How to calculate a future value. The future value is calculated by taking the previous value of the portfolio times the investment rate experienced for the next period. In this case, we want to take the $1 invested in the real estate ETF and show that it lost at an annual rate of 47.8%. Because the period is only 1 month, we want to divide the annual rate by 12 to produce the rate that we need for April 30th, 2009, or 96 cents. Once we have calculated the future value for the remainder of the iShares real estate portfolio and the returns for each of the other 3 remaining portfolios, we will be ready to calculate the formula for the guru-rated portfolio. The guru-weighted portfolio is a composite of an equal weighting of each of the 4 ETFs. In other words, 25% of the funds are invested in each of the individual ETFs, and when the individual amounts are added, that gives you 100% of the portfolio. The formula that you have is a bit long, but essentially it takes the annualized return and multiplies it by the respective weight. So a loss of 32% times 25%, a loss of 47% times 25%, a loss of 12% times 25%, and a loss of 36% times 25% gives you the weighted average that you should have for the guru-weighted portfolio. The guru-weighted portfolio appears in column M, and I have shown to you in this row that is being highlighted, the formula that appears in cell M5 for the Guru weighted portfolio. Step number 3 is to calculate the maximum return of each of the 5 elements in the portfolio. That is done using the max function in Excel. And what the max function does is to return the highest value in the range that is highlighted. So in cell Q5, Excel will evaluate the return for the S&P 500, the return for the real estate shares, the return for EFA, the return for the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, and the return for the Guru weighted portfolio, and place that value in cell Q5. The function for column Q is being shown to you in the area of the spreadsheet highlighted now. The fourth part to this video is an interesting one because you get a chance to use many different Excel functions. What we want to do first is to calculate the number of holding periods for each of the funds that have a negative number of years. That is done using the COUNTIF function, which takes the range of values and it will count these values if the criteria is met. So you have a range followed by a criteria. In this case, the criteria, shown in quotes, is it will count if the value that it sees in a range is less than or equal to 0. And you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 returns for the real estate ETF that was negative in the period that we have. The next metric that we want to calculate would be the number of periods that have more than a 20% holding period return. To do this, again, we will use the COUNTIF feature for the same range, except we are going to show that the desired metric is the value greater than or equal to 20% in quotes. And as you can see, when this particular range is evaluated, there were 2 periods that exceeded 20%. The next item is the simple average return, and in this case we want to evaluate the highlighted area and calculate the average. Excel uses the equal average with a range to calculate that average value. Next item down is a standard deviation. Standard deviation, very simply, is equal STDEV for the range indicated, and once you push enter, Excel calculates the standard deviation. The next function is a little bit more involved. We want to calculate the compound average growth rate for a particular ETF. In this case, we are going to use the original value invested, $1, and then the ending value at the end of the particular holding period. The rate function first has us use the details of any Excel function can be determined by clicking on the cell where the function appears and then going up to the menu bar and clicking the FX feature to show a pop-up menu that indicates the various values that should go into the formula itself. So the number of periods was found by taking the value in C23, which was the number of periods that we had. There were no interim payments. The present value would be in the cell G4, which was the original $. Note that this item is negative. The Excel formula works only when the present value has a sign different from the future value. And then the future value that appears in cell G12. The type represents whether it is a beginning of the period or end of the period payment. For our purposes, let's leave that value at 0, meaning end of the period. When you click OK, the compound average growth rate is calculated for this particular holding period. The next item that we have is a Sharpe ratio, which is calculated in a different tab, and it's best to keep this simple by copying all the information that we have in this table and putting it into a brand new table. The Sharpe ratio shows the risk-adjusted return that the portfolio provides. It does this by taking the expected value, a fancy term for an average value, of the return premium, which is the return of the portfolio compared to the risk-free rate, divided by the standard deviation. Standard deviation is risk. The numerator is the return premium. So for any Sharpe ratio that's better than 1, the return that the portfolio produces exceeds the risk that the portfolio takes on. So to calculate the Sharpe ratio, what we have done for each period is to take the return of the portfolio less the return on one-year T-bills. So calculating that for each of the portfolios, and then dividing by the standard deviation of the portfolio, we get the Sharpe ratio. This Sharpe ratio then can be referred to using the reference to another worksheet feature that Excel has by just clicking an equal sign and then referring to the value that's in the other spreadsheet. To wrap up, what we have done is to calculate the future value of a dollar using this formula, 1 plus the interest rate divided by 12, because you had annual returns to calculate monthly progressions. The second thing that we did, we calculated a weighted average value return for the Guru weighted portfolio. The third thing that we did is to calculate the maximum value of each year and what iShares ETF earned that high value rating. And fourth, we calculated a series of metrics for each of the portfolios for the entire holding period. In a separate video, we'll demonstrate how to create charts of the information that we just created in this video. Give all this a shot. Do well.